Hey everybody, what is going on? This is Scott Garber back in the saddle of the ProFluence Sports Podcast, where we are highlighting founders, investors, executives across the sports business landscape. Today I'm excited to welcome our next guest, John Willi, president of Accelerate Media, to the show, where we're going to be talking about the evolution of high school sports, media rights, and how we're narrowing the focus on a really fragmented market. It's not my story to tell. John, my man, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Doing awesome, Scott. Thank you. Honored to be here and excited to chat about this. It's an incredibly exciting field.
Man, it feels like every day is just getting more and more exciting in sport. There's so much opportunity because of the shakeup that's going on. And, John, as we always do here on the ProFluence Pod, it's so important to understand your tenure within the space, as you've covered a wide gamut from minor league baseball to the NFL to IMG Academy. Give the listeners a little insight to your journey through sport and how you landed at Accelerate.
Certainly. So obviously started as a player like most people in the space, got out of college and went right into minor league baseball. So spent a good period of time there, 10 plus years, running local teams as a president and GM, very young president and GM, which really gives you that sort of kickstart into that entrepreneurial spirit, community, grassroots marketing, and so forth. So got my footing there, and then elevate into the college space for several years with IMG College, where we were helping schools monetize their media rights and their partnerships across 100 plus schools, and spent a good amount of time in New Jersey with Rutgers Athletics. We're very successful there as we grew into the Big Ten years ago, right? And so that college experience was sort of pivotal to this whole thing. And then really elevated to the NFL, working with the New York Jets for several years, particularly in that corporate partnership space specifically. So sort of got a wider lens and sort of a higher, sort of process and standard for doing things. And then following the NFL, moved into the global agency space with Playfly, not in the college area, but more so with a group that was bringing to market marquee assets, right? So naming rights, jersey patches. And during that time, I was fortunate enough to work on the World Cup, which we're obviously all experiencing now, but have an opportunity as we were advising, I should say, a number of the host committees. And so really got an insight into that. And so all that sort of ascension into maybe a wider lens into global sports and more complex partnerships and media rights. And then kind of came full circle when Doug Phillis, the founder of Accelerate, is someone I'd worked with and was very successful with at IMG College, invited me to kind of come on board and grow this part of the business. So bringing it all back from, the early days of minor league baseball and first pitches and fireworks and mascots, right, all the way up to sort of global sports where we are now, and then bringing it back into that sort of local community. It's been an interesting ride, but hopefully those experiences have helped make me uniquely suited to what we're doing now.
Well, and I think it takes that holistic approach, John, right? Like we're watching so much innovation and change happen that, I'm a believer of if you were able to play the sport, work at different levels of it, you now have a wide perspective of how we got here. So sometimes that alleviates us from making some of the same mistakes that might look good on paper that we know don't always stand up in the market. And that's what, gets us excited when we hear about folks like yourself that have really rolled up their sleeves and, participated at each level. Now, before we get into the nuts and bolts of what's going on in the market, let's talk a little bit about Accelerate, because you guys are a giant over there and there's some names that dominate this space. But for anybody that isn't familiar, give us a little insight to the entirety of Accelerate and what piece of the business you're actually focusing on.
Well, it's really a fascinating company that's grown, overnight, astronomically over the last few years. So our Accelerate Holdings is really operating or overseeing three distinct businesses and business lines within college and high school sports. And so the legacy business is Accelerate Sports Ventures, which is focused on NIL, consultancy, and advisory for college conferences, athletic programs, and student athletes as well. And that's even morphed to add sort of a football operations perspective, where we're now helping with scouting, portal management, roster management, the portal process, evaluation, et cetera, bringing sort of the football background and the financial acumen in to kind of help coaches and ADs. So that's a growing business. We have a business in there, Athlete Capital, that's focused on revenue generation for schools, where we'll embed teams on campuses to help find revenue outside of the normal MMR and sponsorship world of the athletic department and the teams. And so that's really going to fuel a lot of the NIL growth. And then we have Accelerate Media, where I'm focused now, is really our high school business and our broadcasting network business. And that has, several tiers within it. But Accelerate as a whole, it's been interesting to kind of tie those pieces together because in some ways they're complementary, right? Seeing athletes, seeing teams, programs, the sports start, from middle school, high school level, right through the college ranks, and even see those athletes develop along that path too. So, that's really helped us out, and Accelerate Media is involved in like a couple of different areas within the high school business.
It's really interesting. And just for a couple more points of clarity, on the Accelerate Media side, you guys are coming into the high school game. We know that high school sports are evolving and changing. Did you guys have a strategic approach in going geographic-based, sport-based? Give us a little insight to the logic of how do you start to take this wildly broad category and fragmented category and start to eat the elephant one bite at a time. What was the strategy as you sort of took this role?
Well, it's interesting. There's so much to unpack there. It's really just starts with the scope of the high school business to begin with, or the high school industry, if you call it. At a very high level, you start to notice as you kind of get around the sports world, believe it or not, there's really nothing more powerful than high school sports in the sports landscape. There's something like 500 million attendees, right, to high school sporting events across the U.S. on a given year, which is more than all the major sports pro leagues and, pro sports leagues and college conferences, right? So you start to step back and go, wow, this is an incredible, sort of collection or an entity, but it's so fragmented. Right. And so within that, it's unique in that it's got that local connection. You think about high school football and particularly being that local community gathering, and the passion that for parents, for instance, athletes, whatever, but parents particularly, have for those games far exceeds naturally, right? Their kids playing far exceeds any love for a pro team or college team. So sports in itself is so timeless and valuable now and more as we go on. But we look at this and we say it's massive, it's lasting, it's local, right? We've got a chance to. It's very different than anything else, and it's an incredibly untapped market in terms of the business side. And so the way we looked at it, and again, probably lean on a little bit to simplify it. In college sports is starting to look like the pros, right? In many facets. High school sports in many ways will start to look like the college we knew, maybe 10, 15 years ago, right? And so for us, the first step was making sure we did it the right way, which I can expand on, but taking a look at where the opportunities are, and very much not too unlike that IMG business or that college business, really focusing on owning the local or regional market. Right, representing the conferences and the schools and the activity within a defined market. Then we add the sort of the network layer, which I think we discovered has a tremendous opportunity there because it's not really being done the way we're doing it. And then giving the athletes a bit more of a platform on through content and games and so forth. So being able to kind of hit all those levels there, we look at it and say, hey, it's an approach to sort of own a market, build out the marketing rights, the partnership rights, build those networks out, and then move on and sort of replicate that in the next market, all sort of rolling that up. We're very different than maybe it's been done elsewhere, like you said, on sort of a national scope.
Yep.
But again, when we look at what we did at IMG, a lot of the success was, local sales teams, local operations, and kind of rolling that up.
Well, it's quite interesting, right? If we look back, I believe all of these loops are cyclical. It almost feels like the RSN game all over again, but at a more localized and regionalized level when we look upstream, right? Like that's getting very disrupted, but it's really neat to watch it sort of get recycled, that logic, and apply it to what I think is like the core of the community. And what you're saying is the high school entity. It's not always just the minor league team and or sort of the pro team that lives in that area. John, I got to ask though, right? Because there's in our world, there's two things happening at this age bracket, right? And we're watching a lot of competitive athletes get pulled into the club ecosystem, which is very complementary, but sometimes competitive to the high school ecosystem. And that wasn't always the case. How do you guys think about club sports in this media roll-up versus just pure traditional high school sport?
It's interesting, and I think it depends on the sport, right?
Yeah.
I think football and girls flag football, which is a whole nother story, where we're really leaning into in the various areas. It's a little different than some of the other sports, and having 3 kids and going through the travel scene in different sports, totally get it. I think what's different here in terms of commercial opportunity is it is part of that youth sports ecosystem that we're seeing so much investment in. but it's different. High school sports is family and participants, of course, but it's also alumni, it's also fans, it's also faculty. So it has a much sort of broader interest from a commercial perspective than that travel sports game or that tournament.
Mm-hmm.
The other part of it we see really is, sort of the differentiation of, like you said, the competition in high school. And we're starting to see more and more the public schools are competing to keep athletes from the private schools. The private schools are competing to keep athletes from the prep or the traditional sort of lodging schools, right? And they're all competing to kind of make sure in the different sports that high school is more relevant than the youth sports circuit. So I think we're helping that part of the battle in a sense in supporting the schools and conferences by giving it a higher platform, making high school sports exciting, bringing the game of the week broadcast, right? Bringing partners in to maybe elevate the in-stadium and the on-site experience, and to kind of make local stars of some of the kids and coaches participating. It probably helps elevate high school sports, at least keep it on par with what's going on in the club scene,
which is so needed, right? Like, and I believe that these resources that are given to the elite prep schools, we can't always send them downstream, right? But like, we're at a point where we can democratize them and elevate that experience from when I played high school sports. And if you look at it, it still sort of looks the same, right? And so I think it's really neat when you're able to professionalize even at the public level and give that same look, feel, experience. And look at John, this all sounds really good, right? But I mean, I come from the youth sports world. I understand sort of the nuances of working with school with high schools, and then with athletic departments, and then with school districts. Talk to me. How are you guys actually structuring these deals and working through so many decision makers and red tapes? Like, there's a couple of schools, the Iona Prep, like that you guys think anchored around. Walk us through the mechanics of how you take this great idea and actually bring this thing to life, and how everybody is benefiting from it financially.
Well, that's great. That's a great question. And so, in terms of structure, we look at it, like I said, in the market, in the sense of a market. So this started a couple of years ago with something called the Super Football Conference, the SFC. The Super Football Conference is the largest high school football conference in the country with 112 teams. And it represents an area of 6 counties in northern New Jersey, and probably a residential population of over 3 million. So it's its own market, its own monster. And being able to work with the conference and the conference leadership to help with their marketing, their events, their branding of the conference, and then bring some corporate partners in carefully was really the sort of the start of this. And so grouping it by cluster or market or conference. And then from there, we built the SFC network, which is, again, to simplify, think about the Big Ten network, right? Live broadcasts, game of the week, pregame shows, right? Content, really building it out to help promote the conference and provide new opportunities for the schools. And then we took it down to sort of the local level, where schools were coming to us saying, hey, we've had budget cuts, or we see what's going on there. Like, how do we raise revenue the right way? How do I do this? Help us out. And so we've been able to sort of work on that conference cluster and local school network, and build our own network of schools, right? To then go out to market and bring partners in to sort of execute in that area. We've also been able to structure a couple of partnerships with third parties that can bring us some additional assets to fill the gap. So, I think what we're doing now is we've pretty much this year now solidified the New York City DMA part, right? We've got New Jersey moving to Long Island, Westchester with Iona Prep, and kind of building that out as an offering and being able to manage that from one business operation. You mentioned Iona Prep. I think part of the strategy starts for us with partnering or aligning with the premier programs first, right? And so by doing that and sort of showcasing that, we'll be able to sort of legitimize or lift the whole platform. And then also, because again, I mentioned we want to do things right. Part of this personally is about helping the schools, helping the athletes, and making sure, as it's ultimately going to be commercialized, that it's done in the right way.
Yeah.
Right? So we partner with the programs, and then we sort of incorporate more programs and kids. And the interesting thing is, from a revenue perspective, there's revenue share in all of this, right, for conferences and schools. And when a partner gets involved, inevitably, their investment's staying in the community. And so we're doing scholarships, we're funding programs, we're funding events. A lot of it is cycling back. And so, if whether you're a national brand and you want to execute something cohesively in a DMA, or you're a local brand and you want to cluster, 5 schools or a county, you can do something thoughtful with the sort of approach and intentionality that you might get working with a pro sports team and pro sports executives. you can execute that locally, but also see it happening firsthand and see the benefits of the community.
Which I think is so important, right? You know, like if you look at the tea leaves now, everything went from really macro and vanity to now more micro and quality, right? And it's like I want to be able to go ahead and feel the effects of the dollars that I'm putting back into my local community, whereas before we would sort of shoot them into the ether and hope that they would deliver. And so how has the response been with SFC as this network has continued to grow and expand sort of at a rapid pace? Has the hypothesis of doing it the right way stood up in the market? And like, have we seen the trickle effects of the rev share and like schools sort of eating it or eating from it? Like, what does that look like in actuality?
Well, without a doubt. I mean, with that initial conference we mentioned, the SFC, before we expand it to others, I mean, they're giving out 120 scholarships a year.
Wow.
And making sure every school's getting something, do a man of a year program that we support, where it's a combination, obviously, of athletic ability, but it's mostly what you're doing in the community and your academics and so forth. So a lot of times we're bringing partners in and we have to really scrutinize, and they have to add some kind of value or some kind of fit to the ecosystem. Otherwise, it's just not wise to do it, right? So the reaction on the brand side is, overwhelmingly positive. Because I don't know that they know this exists, right? And they know they can be able to do this in a way. We've got enough case studies now after the last year or two where it's really working out. I would say on the school side and the conference side, what you said is so critical, what I think makes us different. There's a lot of great opportunities in high school sports and in sports, and some maybe working on a macro level, and they should all be evaluated and looked into, because anything that sort of elevates high school sports is worth taking a look at. I think for us, where we're trying to be different is that authenticity. We're dealing with the athletic directors, we're dealing with superintendents, we're dealing with the conference folks, the coaches. And I think that's very different than, a legacy business that's maybe been trying to sell them something or a service, valuable or not. We're not trying to sell anything to the schools, right?
Yeah.
We're trying to find a way to elevate them, and more ways we can help support the students, support the schools, support the school finances. And given it's only been a year or two here in this whole project, the response is overwhelming. There's a lot of inbound. I mean, we're getting questions now, Scott, about can we sell naming rights in jersey patches? Slow down. We're not there yet, but that's really happening.
The demand is there,
right? And so again, I don't. It's not up to us, but we'd like to see it paced the right way. And the only thing slowing us a little bit is our thoughtfulness of like, let's make sure we do it right here. Let's make sure we do it right in New York. Let's make sure we do it right in New England, and bring the right partners in.
Which is super exciting. And John, you're the president of one cog in this much larger wheel, right? And so I'm going to sort of steer the conversation in a direction and try to understand how does the flywheel of Accelerate work, right? Because I think what's interesting is when you look at, if we use the Big Ten Network as an example, live streaming of the games is one of the programs that they put on. But then you also now have access to the athletes and the coaches and the athletic directors, and we're watching podcasts and we're watching all kinds of other programming come on and fill the space within this network, right? So it becomes this almost always on programming at the network level and then at the school level. I'm curious, how does your line of business feed the larger vision of Accelerate with your guys' unique position in at the collegiate level and some of the other endeavors that you guys are working on?
Well, certainly. I mean, there's a few parallels here, and I think ultimately the different divisions can cross-pollinate a bit and help each other, right? So if you think about what we're doing in the network space, you said it, right? It's premium games. I think the difference, there's a lot of streaming going on at the high school level. Where we're trying to be different is that it's more of a college TV broadcast feel. We've got college and pro announcers. We've got sideline reporters. We've got players on features on players. And then to your point, we're programming out content, shorts, shows, and really sort of building that out. We're seeing a demand for that too, that kind of maybe off-air programming, right, or non-live programming in some of the spaces we're working in college with NIL and the athletes and putting brands there. So we're seeing that crossover too. We're also on the other side, look, we're revenue generators at the college level as well. And so there's obviously some sharing of opportunities there that can take place, right? And I think our college footprint has been national, but we've got somewhat of a cluster around where we're doing some of the high school work as well. Lastly, you think about that NIL space, and I think our goal is always to be a solution provider and an educator, right, at its core. And so we're doing that work at the college level. At some point, right, maybe there's an opportunity to support more on the high school level. We've done some of that, but How do we support coaches, schools, parents, and at least educating them on what's ahead? We're not agents, and so we're not looking for the commission. I think it's a little more of just sort of an authentic advisory or support role. We work with one of the best high school basketball programs in the nation out of New York, and part of our support there is providing that sort of advisory role or guidance when the athletes need it, which I think as a coach, especially we talk about that recruiting, it's an advantage to have someone here, right, who can help kind of give you some guidance, because a lot of these kids are looking towards, that ultimate reality of NIL money.
It's a very different world, John, than me and you were playing sports, man. It's exciting, it's scary, it's there's a lot of things that need to be discussed, which we're talking about. And I think, the inevitability is like once you lift the amateurism sort of threshold at college, there's nothing stopping from flowing this thing downstream. And so like, I'm going to ask you to put on your sort of imaginative hat, right? Like, let's think 3 years from now. I don't even think we can think about 5, right? What are some of the things that you're seeing come down the pike from your vantage point that gets you really excited? Let's start there.
Well, I think the high school space, like we said, it's just all that we talked about, right? It's that scope, that size, that sort of endless opportunity. I think the youth space we've talked about quite a bit. I think we're starting to look at that commercialization there. I think what we're doing in particular with the networks and the broadcasting can be a real asset to the schools and the athletes, right? We talk about supporting the athletes, highlights and recruiting efforts. We're talking about what we're doing to elevate the schools. There's constantly, depending on the school and the market, there's financial issues. And then there's also an arms race for better or worse. I mean, I think I just saw a school in Oklahoma, a high school, build a 50,000 square foot football training facility, and it's a public school, right? Yeah. So I think what I'm excited about is maybe even just the opportunity. I mean, we certainly, want to help the premier schools like we do kind of elevate and compete and provide opportunities. But I think it's the opportunity we can give the broader scope of high school. Maybe that's schools that aren't ready to build that facility, or athletes that they do want to keep home. What can we do sort of there to support it? But honestly, I think what's most exciting is the demand. There's a lot of demand for what we're doing. There's a lot of need for help. And if we can keep making sure everything we're doing is sort of additive and supportive to that ecosystem, I mean, I think that's really where the value is.
I love it. We're going to zoom out of core business line for a second. We'll stick sort of with just what you're seeing in the market. Always fun to talk about what's exciting. What's the other side of the fence? What keeps you up? That from a macro level, having 3 kids go through the system with the direction we're going, where would you say that as stewards and participants in the sports business industry, we should be keeping an eye on that's, maybe a little more volatile?
Well, I think where there's opportunity, right, there's a lot of chances for missteps there, right? And I think it's, the concern would be, is everyone involved in the space and trying to monetize the space, trying to do the right thing? Inevitably not, right? And so I think it's much more around, making sure those things are done at the appropriate pace. They're done to high quality, and, the athletes are still treated like kids. Because, we've got 16-year-olds, running for touchdowns or hitting 3-pointers, and they have to be allowed to be 16, right? And so I think, right, there's going to be a lot of opportunity. There's certainly NIL opportunities now in high school, but if the college is going to be what it is, wonderful. Maybe this is the training ground for those athletes to get ready for college. But what it also is that kid that doesn't play college. And so for him to sort of aspire, or her to aspire to be on our network, to be scoring, to be highlighted as an underrated player of the week type of thing, right? Like, see mom and dad and grandma, be able to see them put on. So that's sort of the epitome of their high school experience. And I think there's nothing more important in a sense to development and having kids too, whether it's youth sports, it's high school sports, is just playing and being on that team. Whether you're competing as the best kid on the team or you're just a member of the team, what you learn from a sense of teamwork, resilience, right, challenge, hard work, those are priceless for the next 60 years. Those are priceless lessons. And we don't want to ever lose that in the high school space.
I'm so glad you brought up the F word. Fun. I think that we, it's amazing when we professionalize assets to be able to go ahead and experience playing in top-notch facilities or seeing yourself on the television. But there's also a level of acumen that comes with being a professional. And I think that's been one of the things that's been, maybe I've been there's some trepidation around it where, it's like, look at 16 years old, you're still a knucklehead, right? And you do things. And like before that, used to just live on my huddle film. And now this lives in perpetuity on a network. And so I think that there's amazing highlight effects, but I also think that it's going to cause us as a society to help kids grow up a little bit faster. And that's just a reality of the world that we're living in. I have a 4 and a 1-year-old, John, right? The world that they enter into, before it was social media, now it's everything. You're being evaluated as a professional. And so, I'm curious, like with you guys doing this work, putting frameworks, monetizing and professionalizing, are you seeing resources from the high schools be sent downstream for their athletes to help them turn into professionals? Or what's that look like, when like more feet on the ground with the schools that you guys are working with?
Well, definitely. And I think schools are leaning into that idea of education, right? And so, even sort of the byproduct, right? We're bringing in, health and wellness experts. We're bringing in mental health advisory, right? Sort of, particularly in sports performance, we have partners in that space. And I think schools are certainly looking in that area. We're also seeing more of that sort of financial education, which could be important, right? Maybe some things are lacking. I think the athletics sometimes will drive that, toward the student population. But yeah, we're really seeing a proliferation too of like, how do we become more relevant on social media? How do we give our kids something to feel good about? And so you're definitely seeing that from the school level. But they need guidance. And I think a lot of what we have to maintain is we have to continue to listen to what's needed. And that's really, whether it's been, I think I could speak for Accelerated, it's whether that's been at the college level or the high school level. A lot of it is like listening. Here's a challenge. How do we solve it? And then we're kind of bringing the resources to the table to help support it. So
2 ears and 1 mouth, John. That's why we were created that way. Regardless of what your ego directs you to do, we should always listen more than we speak. Parenting's taught me that. All right, John, last question before we go into rapid fire and bring this thing home. I'm really curious, with you guys launching networks right now and working in local communities, you're serving a wide constituency of viewers. We're watching newer sports leverage the creator, like an iShow Speed and FIFA, to go ahead and speak to that younger generation. But also, my grandma and grandpa like to watch the traditional broadcast. How are you guys thinking about attacking such a wide demo of viewers in these networks to make sure that you're serving each generation with how they consume?
Well, that's a really good question because, to go back to it, part of the mission here is to broaden this to high school students that maybe aren't playing, sports, right? Because that is important to the entire ecosystem and the administrators as well. And so we work with aspiring, media students, influencers that want to be part of the broadcast, right? As sort of an understudy. We've had sideline reporters that are, budding high school broadcasters. But we're also, kind of thinking about this network of all the schools we work with and incorporating ambassadors from those schools, sort of content creators, right? So I can't be at 300 schools every Friday night. And so how do we kind of create this ecosystem internally of creators and content and different pieces that we can, again, maybe is much more relevant to that high school demographic than just a traditional sort of presentation. And so you hit on it. It's the live broadcasts. It's the highlights from those broadcasts. I mean, once you have that content, it could be packaged 15 ways. So we're definitely thinking about that. But we're also thinking about like, how do we incorporate feet on the ground in that age demo who really understands what they're looking for and make that a big part of the network.
Yeah, almost bar stool for high school if I'm thinking about it the right way. It's there's something to it, right? Like, I mean,
those guys. It fits the mission, Scott, right? It fits the mission of getting people involved in community and participating. And, really it's sports, but it's like I said before, it's there's nothing that has that unity or brings a community together, I think, than that game, that especially football, that game on Friday night, or even if you're in the soccer finals, right? The whole community's behind it. And whether you like in this market, you like the Jets or the Giants or Mets or Yankees, you might be divided in town, but in town, you all care about that high school.
Damn it, everyone loves the Knicks. And for the first time, I watched New York come together and assholes turn nice for just a little bit of time. It was great to see there, John. All right, we're going to go rapid fire. I got a couple questions for you, and then we're going to bring this thing home, all right? Mm-hmm. So when we think about it, what's one trend in sports media everyone is underestimating right now?
Well, I think you talk about the creator angle, right? Or maybe the alternate broadcast. I mean, it's a couple years old, but, I think about that Manning cast concept and how that could really kind of apply to what we're doing in 5 different ways, right? Whether it's a different age demo, it's different packaging, it's sort of highlight packages. So, I really like that. And again, I just think what's happening at the younger levels of sports, or smaller sports, right? Where gone are the days where we take, pickleball or, high school lacrosse to get on a stage, 10, 20 years to get on a stage with some other, more developed sports and content, that can happen overnight. And so I think that's something that, the governor's off, I should say.
Yeah, it is wide open, my friend. I agree with that. All right, here we go. Second question. Streaming or traditional TV? Which one wins locally over the next decade?
Well, I think we have to lean into streaming. And it's because a lot of the things we talked about here, right? It provides the customization, it provides the access. And I think a lot is done on demand anyway. Particularly, we're even seeing that too, right? We have the live broadcast. We're going to have people who are not at that big game viewing, but then we're getting multiple hits and views for that content afterward, right? I want to see that play again. I want to see how the announcer called it. I want to see. So I think in our space, definitely that streaming. I'm traditionalist. I love the big broadcast, the Monday Night Football, but you can stream that too, or Thursday Night Football. So I think that's, you said it. That's the way it's going.
Yeah, nope, that sounds great. All right, last one, and this one's personal. John, who's one person in the sports business industry that has been influential in the success that you've been able to have over your long tenure?
Well, I think that's tough to say because there's so many, right?
Yeah.
I think back to my early days in development. There was a guy by the name of Bill Dowling, who back in the day was running the Yankees for George Steinbrenner, right, as the team executive president, and was somebody I worked for in minor league baseball who really got me started in the space and kind of taught me the right way to deal with people, right, in situations, have a big picture thinking, which you don't always get when you dive into maybe a corporate environment as a kid.
Yep.
And then I would say, working in IMG really was kind of helped shape my perspective at the next level. And so people like Doug Phillis, who are now working with Accelerate, Tim Pernetti, who was president of IMG College at the time, is now, the commissioner of the American. Those are some of the folks that maybe had a chance to work a little more, closely with, but maybe took me out of that sort of community, minor league baseball world and kind of shifted into this broader view. So I'd probably have to lean on those folks.
I think you hit on it a couple times through the conversation. Sport is just this magical entity that cuts through all of the BS and the noise, and just like food, it has the ability to bring humans together to do something bigger than ourselves. And so I think it's always neat to hear the pedigree of someone like yourself, how you got here, and now how you're helping shape what I think is, like, for the first time, a blank canvas. It's not like you're going against the headwinds. You now have tailwinds to actually take all this learning and put it back in the market. John, from Scott, from the ProFluence team, dude, thank you for everything you've done for the industry. Thank you for what you're doing and continuing to do. If folks want to learn more about what you guys are doing, SFC, the incredible networks you're spinning up, what's the best way to learn more about Accelerate?
Well, you can certainly hit up one of our many websites, which I think we're relaunching in the next few days, a number of them. AccelerateSportsVentures.com is a good home base. We've got the SFC or Super Football Conference Network.com, and then AccelerateSportsNetwork.com rolling out. And we're all pretty prevalent on LinkedIn, on Instagram. And then personally hitting me up on LinkedIn, and feel free to reach out. Would welcome it.
Love it. We are one connection away from a new opportunity changing our whole world. If you like the conversation with John, be sure to reach out to him. He's an amazing human doing amazing things in sports. John, thank you again for everything you're doing, and I look forward to catching up here soon.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it.